Your motorhome has a maximum weight limit, that is a limit defined by law. If you load too much into your motorhome, you break this maximum, which is an offence. This maximum is known as GVW, or gross vehicle weight. It's also sometimes known as MAM, the maximum authorised mass. Or how about this for a mouthful? MTPLM, maximum technically permissible laden mass. All of these things mean the same thing, and from now on we'll just call this the max weight. When you are fully loaded and off on your holes, you must be under the max weight. So how much can you pack? Well, now we know that a motorhome has a maximum weight. If we know what it weighs when it's empty, then we know how much weight we can pack before going over the maximum weight. The thing is, every little thing we put in the van reduces the payload. This includes you too. So when you step into your van, that's a chunk of your payload gone. In my case, that's a big chunk. But don't forget the rest of your family. Whatever they weigh comes off your payload too. And of course, there are your pets and their food, your clothes, towels, washing kit, your food. You'll need gas for cooking that food, a saucepan, a frying pan, and then you'll need plates and cutlery, salt and pepper, tomato sauce. How about washing up? You'll need fairy liquid in a bowl, and let's not forget all that beer to wash it down with. Think about all the other stuff you'll want to take with you. Shoes, if you're anything like our family, the guys might have one, maybe two pairs, while the women will have a pair for each day, sometimes two. You might have bikes, golf clubs or fishing gear. Even the little things add up. That computer, your phone, the iPad and the chargers. And don't forget that standby tin of corned beef that's in most motorhomes. It's done thousands of miles in the cupboard and will never get eaten. Your breakfast cereal, the bowl, the milk, the spoon, your kettle, your mug, your Yorkshire tea bags and even the teaspoon. It all eats into your payload. So why is it important we don't overload our motorhome? The quality and specification of things in your motorhome, like the suspension and the brakes and the chassis, are configured with the maximum weight in mind, and these can be seriously impaired if you overload. Any braking and cornering will likely be degraded, and no matter how good a driver you are, if you are overloaded, should you ever have to swerve or brake heavily doing more than 50 miles an hour, then it could well be squeaky bum time as your van takes on the handling characteristics of a car ferry. And because of all that, it's illegal to be overloaded. And if you are caught, the law allows a maximum fine of £5,000 for each offence. So if you are stopped and are over your max weight, that is one offence. If you are overloading an axle at the same time, that's another. If you are heavier than your tyres are rated for, there's another. That's 3 offences from one stop. That could be a £15,000 fine. Okay, don't panic. The real world fines are never anywhere near the max and are often in the low hundreds. But it's not just a fine you should worry about. If it's deemed you are dangerously overloaded, you could be prosecuted for dangerous driving, and that might mean porridge. If you cause a death when dangerously overloaded, you could be charged with manslaughter, and that might mean a lot of porridge. So if you are running heavy, what are the chances of you getting caught? I'd say right now they are low but increasing. There are now at least 12 weigh-in motion sensors on roads in the UK. So bombing down the road without knowing, you drive over the sensors, your picture is taken, a computer whirs somewhere, and instantly they know if you are overweight. They also know if one of your axles are overweight. So they pull you in down the road and dish out the prosecutions. So how do you work out how much payload you actually have? Well, this in theory couldn't be simpler. If we weigh the motorhome empty, we can take this weight from the max allowed and we know what's left is our payload. So say we have a motorhome with a max of 3,500 kilograms, 3.5 tons. We weigh it and it weighs 3,000 kilograms. This means we have a payload of half a ton, 500 kilograms. The weight of the empty motorhome is sometimes called the unladen weight, but that's a term more suited to goods vehicles. A better description for us would be the forecourt weight, what the motorhome weighs on the dealer forecourt. In the unlikely event that the maker or dealer gives us a figure for the unladen or forecourt weight, but without a weighbridge ticket, then it should be taken with a pinch of salt because they're probably guessing. First, there is the big fudge, but we'll come to that later. There might be things that have been added at the factory, at the dealers, or if you're buying second hand by a previous owner. The maker might have fitted an automatic gearbox, the dealer might have fitted an awning, a previous owner might have fitted a tow bar or a bike rack. All of these things eat into our payload. So even if we knew what the official unladen weight was for that make of motorhome when it came out of the factory, it's useless now as it's unlikely to be accurate. What we are interested in is what it weighs now on the forecourt. Then we can subtract this figure from the maximum and we will be left with our payload. Except we'll never be told what it weighs now. We'll be given another confusing acronym. MIRO, M-I-R-O, the mass in running order. Rather than give us the unladen empty weight, they give us a thing called MIRO, or sometimes MRO. Let's look at a couple of vans details online. Here we go. It mentions MIRO rather than the unladen weight. So what is this MIRO? Well, it's the unladen weight plus a 75 kilogram driver and some essential items. So we are supposed to subtract the MIRO from the maximum weight, and in theory what's left is your payload. The trouble is, apart from a 75 kilogram driver and 90% of our fuel, that's the diesel fuel, we are never quite sure what the maker is including in the MIRO because they rarely tell us. Is gas included? What size bottle is it? Aluminium or steel? Water? Is there any water in the calculation? Is there a hookup lead? Was that awning fitted after or before the MIRO calculation? Then there is the big fudge I mentioned earlier. Believe it or not, that MIRO figure they give us can legally be plus or minus 5%. So let's say we are told that the MIRO is 3,000 kilograms. It could in reality be 5% more. MIRO might actually be 3,150 kilograms, effectively stealing 150 kilograms of our usable payload. So where we thought we had a 500 kilogram payload to play with, we weigh our new van, find out it doesn't weigh 3 tons at all, it weighs 3,150, which means we only have 350 kilograms left. We have no recourse, they are allowed this massive fudge by law. This makes it even more important that we know precisely what the van we are buying weighs, especially if the van has a max weight of 3,500 kilograms. So what's the problem? Why so little payload? Fact is, we really only see poor payloads on vans that have a maximum weight of 3.5 tons. But these are popular vans, let me explain why. The motorhome market is extremely competitive. Makers need to make their van as good or as better as their opposition, and there's a lot of competition. To attract us, they add nice things which make their vans more appealing. This might mean better quality mattresses, better cupboard catches, better insulation, a double floor, etc. But of course, these things all add to the forecourt weight and reduce our payload. We don't help. We are no longer happy with a freezer compartment that's only big enough for 10 fish fingers and an ice cube tray. These days we want a domestic size fridge with a decent size freezer. We want a big awning, maybe an air conditioner, a satellite dish and a 4G internet aerial. We want everlasting power, which means solar panels, inverters and extra batteries. All of this stuff makes the van heavy, and by the time they leave the factory, many of these vans already weigh around 3 tons. So why don't they just build them on a chassis so we can have authorised mass of 4 tons, which means we would get a whole ton of payload to play with? Well, I'm sure they'd love to do that, but they can't because such a large number of their sales go to people who are only licensed to drive up to 3.5 ton. People who pass their driving test after January 97 are limited to a max weight of 3.5 ton. To drive anything heavier, they need to take another test. Lots of people can't be bothered to take another test, so they stick to the 3.5 ton limit. Meanwhile, if you pass your driving test before January 97, you probably had grandfathered rights and had categories on your licence that allowed you to drive motorhomes up to 7.5 ton. However, many of those who passed their test before 1997 are now getting a bit wrinkly and when people reach 70, they need to renew their driving licence every 3 years. Now that's not too much of an issue, but to keep the licence to drive large motorhomes over 3.5 tonne, they also need a medical. Lots of people over 70 can't be bothered with this medical, or maybe they feel they might fail it, so they revert back to a 3.5 tonne van. So a combination of youngsters who don't want to take an additional test and older folk who don't want the hassle of a medical mean the market for vans that weigh less than 3.5 tonnes is massive. So if vans are coming in at empty close to 3 tonnes, that doesn't leave too much for payload. But 0.5 tonne, I hear you say, it sounds a lot. Well, yes, I suppose it does sound a lot, but we'll see later if it's enough. The dealer will not be responsible if you are overloaded. He might sell you a van that has 4 travel seats and 4 berths, but if you carry 4 people and their luggage and overload your van, it's your problem, not his. So it's imperative that when you buy with enough payload. Many people see a van that has 4 designated travel seats, that's seats fitted with a 3-point seatbelt, and has beds to sleep 4, and assume that it's made to carry 4 people and all their luggage. Chances are a family of 4, even with careful packing, will legally overload a 3.5 tonne motorhome. The brochure may well have showed a family, the picnic table, the teenagers playing swim ball, with 4 push bikes, a surfboard, not forgetting the fat Labrador enjoying the sun. Now plenty of vans will be able to carry all that stuff, but many of the vans with a limit of 3.5 tonnes will not. If you, the family and your black lab are found to be overloading the van, the dealer or maker will not be liable. Rest assured the warnings will be in the specifications and on the websites, warning you about the dangers of overloading. It's up to you to remain legal. During the sales process, it's highly likely that your dealer will never utter the word payload in your presence. This means so many people buy without giving payload a thought. The onus is on you to make sure that you stay within the law. Here is some stuff you should know. The weight plate. Every vehicle on the road has a plate on it which tells us the maximum we can weigh. Simple enough. But most motorhomes will have 2 weight plates. The first will be from the original chassis and engine maker, say Fiat or Ford. The second, known as the Step 2 plate, will be added by the converter, say Auto Trail or Hymer. This plate will show you a number of things. Here is a plate. Let's take a look at what it tells us. Forget all the serial numbers and such like, they're not important here. The first figure is the max weight, or if you remember those acronyms, MIM, maximum authorised mass, or GVW, the gross vehicle weight. That's the first figure. It's the most we can weigh. Okay, the second figure looks generous, but don't get confused here. This is the gross train weight. This is the combined weight of a motorhome and anything it's towing. So unless you're towing, you can really ignore that second figure. The other figures are the maximum axle weights, 1 being the front, 2 the rear, and if you have a tag axle motorhome, 3 will be the third axle. While we're here then, let's talk a little bit about those axles. Sometimes, even when you load the correct amount of payload in your van, you can still be breaking the law if you overload an axle. As well as the payload, we must consider the axle weights. Someone on the forum recently purchased a motorhome with a large rear garage. The van was going to be used by a family and he wanted enough storage to hold things like bikes and bodyboards and wetsuits, etc., and the garage seemed ideal. When he bought the vehicle, he asked the dealer how much weight he could put in the garage. He was told that the garage was very strong and rated up to 1/4 tonne, 250 kilograms. In fact, there was a sticker on the garage door proclaiming as much. Happy days. This was true. This garage was physically strong enough to hold 1/4 tonne with ease. However, because the garage is behind the rear axle, anything placed there adds a disproportionate amount of extra weight on the axle. Weight placed between front and rear axles will share the load. If you place a weight right over the rear axle, you would just load that axle by that much weight. However, weights placed behind the axle add more downward pressure, i.e. weight, on the rear axle and transfer weight from the front. So, 100 kilos placed right over the rear axle loads the axle by 100 kilos. But if that 100 kilos is 1 metre behind the rear axle, because of the fulcrum effect, it's going to add almost 130 to your axle weight. 1.5 metres away, and that 100 kilos adds 143 kilos to your axle weight. So you can imagine that a 90 kilogram motorbike placed on a rack 2 metres away from the rear axle is putting a lot of weight on it. Okay, back to the guy on the forum. One could be forgiven for thinking this van with the 250 kilogram garage was perfect for his needs. Except once he got the van home, he loaded up and went to the weighbridge, only to discover his rear axle was overloaded by a whopping 100 kilograms. Back home, he weighed every item as he took it out of the garage. The weight of his stuff was 160 kilograms, much less than the advertised capacity. So to stay under the axle weight, he could only load 60 kilograms in his garage, a place where he thought he'd be able to load 250 kilograms. The 160 kilograms had added far more weight to the axle via leverage, and this is a common problem, especially where all of a van's useful storage is in a garage a couple of metres behind the rear axle. So remember, you may have a massive garage and a 500 kilogram payload, but if you only have a few kilograms of loading left on the back axle, you can't just pack all your stuff into the garage, even if it does have loads of room. Even if you are not over your maximum weight, if you are overloading an axle, you could still be fined. Okay, so we can find out how much payload we have, but how much payload do we actually need? Okay, let's have a look at these average payloads. We have two columns. The left column is for the vehicle itself. The right column is for each passenger. Remember, these are average payloads from our survey. They're not a list of what you must have. It's a list of the minimum that most people carry. As you can see, most people had a motorhome alarm. Most people carried a barbecue. Almost everyone had a second battery. Now that's hardly surprising when makers of some vans are so keen to keep the miro down that they fit the smallest battery possible. I notice a range of motorhomes in the UK that are being sold with a small 75 amp hour battery. Now that's fine if you only ever use your motorhome on campsites with an electric hookup, but for the average person we surveyed, one battery, especially a 75 amp hour battery, is just not enough. If you want to go on rallies where you might not want to hook up for 3 or 4 days in a field, if you go wild camping for the weekend, then one battery normally isn't enough. A 75 amp hour battery is not enough. So it seems the majority of motorhomes have an extra battery fitted, and this will steal at least 24 kilograms from their payload. Most people also end up fitting a solar panel and a regulator. This will add another 7.5 kilograms. And of course, most motorhomers will have beers on board. They'll have bikes. If they've got bikes, they'll probably need a bike rack and the bike lock, which weighs a couple of kilograms. The list goes on, and while none of the individual items are really heavy, you can see that they all add up. In the right column, we've got personal averages. Many of us have not weighed 75 kilograms since our teens, but some of you might be under 75, so there's a bonus. If you're over 75 kilograms, then you've got to add that down when you're working out what payload you require. You might have a pedal bike that weighs 12 kilograms, or someone might have an e-bike that weighs 22 kilograms. The average seems to be around 16 kilograms. When it comes down to it, an average couple with an average payload are going to need around 400 kilograms of payload. Now, trust me when I tell you there are a lot of motorhomes out there being advertised for a couple or some even a family with less than 400 kilograms of payload. So bear that in mind when looking, and don't forget to add the extra people and pets onto your payload. So now you know how much you need. You just need to tell the seller you want to know what the forecourt weight is and that you would like to get it weighed. Some dealers will not be happy about this. They'll suck in air through their teeth and give you so many excuses of why they can't get it weighed. But if you are buying a van that weighs less than 4 tons, payload could be a real issue. So don't take anyone's word for it. Get it weighed.